So my problem as a young person was not only wanting to be an artist and asking the question, what does art do? So sort of criticizing my decision all the time, not in a kind of paranoid way. I was just interested. I knew I wanted to do it. I just wanted to know why I was doing it, what I expected to get as a result from that eventually, and how I could justify it in the eyes of the lady, for instance, the lady I talked about who made that criticism. And I was training as a painter, but I was becoming a musician. In fact, I couldn't play any instruments. I was learning to pretend that I could be a musician, which I've continued to do for the last 65 years or so, quite successfully. So I had one big decision is, am I going to be doing art or music? And then the second decision was, if it's music, should it be the kind of music that I've been doing for the last few years, which was experimental, John Cage, Christian Wolff, Cornelius Cardew type music, the kind of music that usually has an audience of about 31 people, and they're the same 31 who came to the last one you did. Or should it be the other thing that I loved, which was pop music, where you have much larger audiences. And I couldn't decide, so I carried on doing all of them. I carried on being an artist, a visual artist, making records of pop music, being part of avant-garde performances, thinking that sooner or later I would make a decision. In fact, I never did make a decision. But what happened was that I started to find ways of working that joined these things together, where they could become one form. This kind of strange mixture that I was working with could become one job, as it were. But in doing that, I started to notice that I was losing all of those distinctions that Better described. I stopped thinking of high art and low art. I started to think that so many things that people do in their lives are actually art. They wouldn't even use that name for them themselves, but I started watching how people worked, for instance, how cooks worked. I remember going to this lovely Italian restaurant in London, and I asked if I could go into the kitchen to see what people were doing there. And it was like watching a ballet performance, and it was actually to me, it was more beautiful than a ballet performance. The coordination between these people and the precision and clarity with which they worked. And I started noticing that music of other cultures that we hadn't ever listened to before was intriguingly complex and very, very evolved. And I started to think, surely it's pretty much all the same thing. Now, of course, I started to notice there are distinctions. So what I lost was the idea that there was real art and pop art, or fine art and low art, high art and low art, whatever you like. I just stopped making that distinction. But what I did start to notice was that there was sort of differences in the degree of artiness in things. So, to give an extreme example, the Mona Lisa is an absolutely useless object for doing anything other than being a painting. It'd be stupid to serve tea on it. And it would be very expensive to cover a hole in the wall with it, something like that. It's just an art object. But then there are other things like this chair, for example, which is a functional object, but which has been thought about through an artistic lens in some way. So there's a sort of continuum from art, with the capital A, to craft, design, objects, ornaments, decorations, all of those things, right through to things that are very deliberately not art objects, like surgical scalpels. like saws, like screwdrivers. Now, I'll just talk briefly about screwdrivers because they're a very interesting example. If you buy randomly 6 screwdrivers in the hardware shop, you'll find that all the handles are different. You know, one is blue, one is green, one has got ridges, one is rubber, one is plastic. But you'll find that all the blades are exactly the same. If it's the same size screwdriver, the blade will be identical from one to the next, because there's no room for aesthetic variation there. It has a job to do, and it can't do it any other way. You can't make the screwdriver out of chocolate or marble or plaster of Paris or something like that. It needs to be made of a hard metal to do its job. So I started to think, well, there's this continuum of things from fine art to functional objects. And there's everything in between. Most of the stuff we're dealing with, most of our lives, is in between the two of those two axes, those two poles. So we've got to get away from this idea that only certain things are art and only certain people, the people who make those things, are artists. We have to start thinking of what do we do in all of our lives that is playful, that is like art.
That can be otherwise.